Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of the Tech Experience podcast. And today we are hosting Cloud, the Anthropic versions, and we are going to talk about the challenges of which people are facing through the web coding culture, and is there a future for software engineers and the IIT students who are not embracing it, or how to embrace it. Stay tuned. Let's begin. Cloud, how do you think about the web coding stuff that is happening right now?
Right. So web coding at the moment is mad interesting. There's a lot of shift happening. You've got AI tools making it faster to build, frameworks getting more powerful, and the barrier to entry dropping for people like young devs in Kenya who are teaching themselves. But there's also this tension, yeah. On one hand, tools are handling more, but on the other hand, understanding fundamentals still matters because you can't just rely on AI to solve everything. What's your take on it? How's it affecting what you're building with Wanjiku Digital and the work you're doing?
What about then and technical stuff that who are thinking about the web coding or getting into the AI era? It's all about knowing how to code and how to demystify the myth about that.
So the question is, how do non-technical people in Africa get into the AI and web coding space without already knowing how to code? What are the actual barriers? And how do they break through without getting left behind, yeah? Honestly, I think it's about entry points. Not everyone needs to be a coder. Some people can focus on design, product thinking, understanding AI tools and what they can do, content creation around tech. There's loads of roles. But the core thing is curiosity and willingness to learn. Tools like Lovable, Make, no code platforms, they're lowering the bar. And then mentorship matters too. People like you showing others that it's possible, breaking it down into steps instead of treating it like it's untouchable. What angle are you thinking matters most for your audience on the podcast?
To my point of view is that like anyone can get into the space, but they need to have the passion to enter into the space so that like it becomes easier for them. Like if you don't have passion, like it's like you'll be being forced. But when you have the passion, you'll have the drive will come automatically, and you'll be able to have fun at the same time, and you'll be able to learn. And even if you are lucky enough, you start to earning after you have just a few practice a few things, one, two, or three.
That's spot on, man. Passion is the real engine, not talent or prior knowledge. When you've got that drive, learning stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like building something that matters. And yeah, you can start earning quick if you're focused. Look at what you've done with Wanjiku Digital, side hustles like Nectar Ice, the podcast. You didn't wait until you knew everything before you started moving. That's honestly the message that'll resonate hardest with your African audience, especially young people in Kenya who might think they're too far behind or don't have the right background. They just need to see someone like you doing it.
And what about this? The other thing is about hitting the limits. You find like you want to build something, you're in the middle of the building, then your tokens are over, like the app or the website is in the middle of building, and then like the tokens are where they are over. Like, how do you combat that challenge for a person who doesn't know about more about the tokens?
Ah, yeah, that's a real one. So if someone's using AI tools to build and they hit token limits mid project, they're stuck, right? For someone who doesn't know about tokens, it's frustrating because they think the tool just broke. Here's how I'd frame it. First, understand your tool's limits before you start. Know what your budget is, whether it's tokens, API calls, whatever. Second, break big projects into smaller chunks so you're not trying to build everything in one go. Third, learn the fundamentals enough that you're not entirely dependent on AI. You can pick up where it left off and finish manually if needed. And honestly, there are free and affordable tools now that let you practice without those constraints. It's about being strategic, rather than just throwing yourself at a problem and hoping it works.
Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful. So, and how like do you like, for example, like how do you position yourself how to be to use less token, and that you may be able to build like big apps and the best apps, or like let's say like in this context you're talking about the vibe coding. How do you like ensure you package your prompt well that it may use a few tokens but will give you maximum output?
Right. So it's about being surgical with your prompts, yeah? Instead of asking vague questions, you give specific context and clear instructions up front. That saves tokens because you're not going back and forth clarifying. Break down what you want into steps rather than asking for everything at once. Use examples of what you want if you can. And then, think about what you actually need the AI to do versus what you can handle yourself. Maybe you get it to generate the core logic, but you handle the styling, or vice versa. For web coding specifically, give it the exact tech stack, the component structure you want, any constraints. The more precise you are at the start, the fewer tokens you waste on back and forth corrections. It's like writing a good brief for a designer. Specificity saves time and resources.
Okay, so like talking of that, so like let's say, can you provide like the best like practices, like 10 practices, like something like a pipeline, how from the prompting to the out to get the best output from the AI?
Yeah, so I can walk you through those 10 practices as a pipeline. Basically, from the moment you start thinking about what you need all the way to using what you get. Here we go. First, be crystal clear on what you want before you even write the prompt. Know your end goal. Second, give the AI all relevant context up front, like your tech stack, audience, constraints. Third, break the task into logical steps instead of asking for everything at once. Fourth, use examples of what success looks like if you can. Fifth, specify the format you want the output in code, documentation, whatever. Sixth, ask it to explain its thinking so you understand what's happening. Seventh, test the output immediately rather than assuming it's perfect. Eighth, give precise feedback when something's off instead of vague corrections. Ninth, iterate in focused rounds rather than asking for massive rewrites. And tenth, always review and adapt what you get to your actual context, because AI isn't magic. It's a tool that needs human judgment. Does that land for your audience?
Yeah, sure. So like, what about like I saw like Andre like the CEO of Anthropic like on an interview like some 3 weeks ago saying like you like the software engineering is like it's almost be era is almost coming to an end, and they said it's all about now you focus on the things that about human interactions like stuff like that. So how true is it, and how like can a young African like be able to position him or herself onto the vantage point not to miss this, because now we are like we moved from 2020s, we moved from the chatbots, now we went into the agent eras, and now we are moving from the agent eras, we are entering into the AGI very soon. So how does a young African prepare?
Ugh, yeah, that's the thing Dario Amadei's been saying, right? The idea that pure software engineering as we know it might be transforming fast. But here's my take. He's not saying coding dies, he's saying the nature of the work shifts. Less time on rote tasks, more time on understanding what people actually need, designing systems, thinking about ethics and impact. For young Africans, that's actually an advantage if you think about it. You're not trapped in the old way of doing things. So here's what matters. Learn to code, yeah, but don't just learn syntax. Learn how to think systematically. Second, develop soft skills hard. Communication, problem solving, understanding user needs. Third, stay curious about where technology is heading instead of just chasing what's hot now. Fourth, build things that solve real African problems, not just copy paste what's working in Silicon Valley. Because when AGI stuff comes, the value won't be in I can code fast. It'll be in I understand my market and I can direct powerful tools to solve real problems. That's your edge.
Hmm. So like, okay, you have said that. So like, the other thing is so like like in the Silicon Valley or in the US or Asia or China, they have their own models. So like China, they have like they have DeepSeek and stuff like Kimi. US, they have Cloud, they have the OpenAI, they have many more. But in Africa, like France, they have Mistral, but in Africa, we don't have even a single model. So how like does Africa position itself to be using the models? Because of late we saw like the thing that was happening between Anthropic and the Pentagon. They were integrating AI into their military for no man in the middle. Well, now Africa, we are still fighting using the like the guerrilla warfare style. Like we are not integrating AI into the system. And how do we leverage our own AI systems that we don't depend on other nations' AI systems, like to avoid things that are happening like the in the Strait of Hormuz between the channel where like everybody is being punished for what the US is doing with Iran.
That's a profound point, man. And you're right. Africa's at a disadvantage if it's entirely dependent on Western or Chinese AI systems that can be controlled or restricted by those powers. But here's the thing. Building a continental AI model from scratch is massive. You need compute, data, talent, funding that's just not there yet at scale. So the realistic path isn't waiting for that. It's threefold, yeah? First, Africa needs to build AI literacy and capacity, so we're not just passive consumers. We understand these systems, we can adapt them, we can identify where they fail for African contexts. Second, we need to focus on problems that matter locally: agriculture, health, fintech, where African solutions could actually lead globally instead of always following. Third, we need regional collaboration and investment in tech infrastructure, so we're not completely dependent. You building the tech experience for African audiences, talking about these issues, making tech accessible, that's part of the foundation, honestly. It's not sexy like we built our own model, but it's the groundwork that makes that possible later.
Okay, like so like how do like Africa, so how do we begin to create our model? Because like Africa we can do it, but there is a few barriers here and there. But if talking about like we are the big the biggest grow the fastest growing population now in the world. So but in the 2050, by the UN said we're gonna be like the in one like in out of five working people, three or two will be Africans. So like how do we make sure we are at advantage point?
Right, so that demographic shift is real. Africa will have massive human capital and market potential. Building an AI model requires a few things working together. First, you need compute infrastructure, which means investment in data centers and cloud capacity on the continent. Second, you need high quality data specific to African problems and contexts. Third, you need talent, engineers, researchers, and that means education at scale, which is happening but needs acceleration. Fourth, you need funding, which could come from governments, diaspora tech leaders, impact investors who see Africa not as charity, but as the future market. But honestly, it doesn't have to be one giant continental model. It could be regional hubs: East Africa building solutions for agriculture and mobile money, West Africa for different problems. It could be open source collaboration across borders. The key is starting now with the infrastructure and talent pipeline instead of waiting. Young people like you building skills, creating content about it, showing others it's possible. That's literally the foundation for whoever builds that first African model in 10 years.
So like so speaking of that, we have like we have the companies like the cassava technologies. What about that?
Yeah, Cassava Technologies is doing interesting work in the space. They're building AI solutions focused on African problems, which is exactly the kind of thinking we need. But here's the thing. One company, even a solid one, isn't the same as building the foundational infrastructure and talent ecosystem that makes a continent scale model possible, you know? Cassava's more focused on applications and specific use cases, which is valuable. But creating the actual AI model itself requires something bigger: compute, data sets.
So like now to our listeners who are listening to you, so how can you tell them and most of them are young folks, because like now in Kenya most of the population is about young people from 0 to 25, 0 to 30. They are the majority. So how can you advise them on this AI race that is happening now?
Okay, so to young people listening, this is real talk. First, don't be afraid of AI, but don't be naive about it either. Learn how it works so you understand both what it can do and what it can't. Second, focus on building skills that matter: coding, design, critical thinking, communication. These are things AI can't replace tomorrow. Third, think about problems in your community that tech could solve, not just chasing trends. Fourth, stay informed about what's happening globally with AI, but think locally about how it applies to Kenya. Fifth, and this is important, don't wait for everything to be perfect or for you to know everything before you start. Build something, ship it, learn from it. Ruben's done that multiple times already. And finally, remember that having the African perspective is actually your advantage. You understand markets and problems that Silicon Valley doesn't. That's valuable. The future isn't about being the fastest coder. It's about being the person who solves real problems with these tools.
So be given you are the appointed like the minister of ICT and like IT and technology for the Ministry of the IT of Kenya. So what are the changes that you could have made to ensure everybody's on board on this AI?
Ugh, that's a juicy question, mate. So if I had that role, here's what I'd push for. First, make tech education mandatory and good, not just in universities, but in secondary schools, teaching coding, digital literacy, critical thinking from young. Second, invest heavily in broadband infrastructure so everyone has access, not just Nairobi and major cities. Third, create incentives for tech companies to build here and hire locally instead of exporting talent. Fourth, establish research institutions focused on African AI problems, agriculture, health, fintech, so we're not just consuming foreign models. Fifth, protect data privacy and put regulations in place that give Kenyans control over their own data, rather than letting foreign companies harvest it for free. Sixth, fund startup incubators and give young founders like yourself real support, not just talk. And seventh, honestly, shift the narrative so tech isn't seen as something foreign or elite. It's for everyone. That's the foundation that actually moves the needle.
So, like speaking of that, you have like Safaricom has something called like the decode that has that happened the past few days. So, how do you think about the decode and how can it be scaled and that to ensure that everyone is covered, that it does not happen just in one central place, but can have been placed in many major places in the city?
Yeah, Safaricom's Decode initiative is interesting. They're trying to build tech talent and awareness, which is needed. But here's the honest bit: one program, even from a giant like Safaricom, reaches maybe thousands when we're talking about millions of young Kenyans. To scale it properly, you'd need a few things. First, partner with schools and counties, so it's not just in Nairobi. Take it to Kisumu, Nakuru, Mombasa, smaller towns. Second, make it sustainable beyond corporate goodwill. Embed it into the curriculum so it's not dependent on one company's budget. Third, train local facilitators in those regions so you're not flying people around constantly. Fourth, make the content open source so other organizations can run it too. And fifth, connect participants to actual opportunities: jobs, freelance work, startups, so they see real value. Decode's got momentum, but without that scaling strategy, it stays a Nairobi centric program. Does that align with what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, but on my point of view, I think it's a good idea but that is the only problem that is so only that just in one place. It could be good if it is like being taken to schools like unis where people can compete and stuff. Like yeah, that could be better.
Exactly, yeah, that's the thing. If Decode was in every university, every secondary school, creating competition and momentum locally, that's when it becomes a movement instead of just a program. Schools competing, students building things that matter to their communities, regional hubs of innovation popping up across Kenya. That's how you actually shift the needle. One central initiative in Nairobi doesn't cut it. You need it distributed, grassroots,
So,
accessible.
but speaking of that, like, should the government not be the one doing that work? Because you cannot be putting all the burden to a PLC company because you know they have their investors, they have their goal, financial goals. So we cannot be keeping the burden to them. So the government has a part to play. So how what do you think about that?
You're spot on. That's the crucial point. The government has to lead this, not leave it to private companies. Safaricom's got shareholders and profit targets, so their Decode program will always be limited by that. But government, education is literally their mandate. They should be funding tech education in schools, setting curriculum standards, investing in infrastructure and internet access everywhere, not just where it's profitable. Private companies can partner and contribute, yeah, but they can't be carrying the whole load. The problem in Kenya is government hasn't made this a real priority yet. Tech education gets underfunded compared to other things. If the Ministry of Education actually committed resources and made digital literacy and coding standard across the country, that changes everything. Government sets the foundation, then private sector and NGOs build on top. That's how you actually scale.
So like speaking of that, like if you saw what like there's a video you saw about China, like they are using even AI in classes. Like how do like a Chinese a child like that who's raised in China, like who's been trained with the AI from the ground, compete with another young child who's from Africa who does not even know what AI is?
That's the hard truth, right? A Chinese kid growing up with AI in their classroom from primary school, learning alongside it, understanding how it works. They've got a massive head start over an African kid who's never even touched these tools. By the time they're competing for jobs or building companies, the gap is massive. That's why they can't wait, man. The government needs to move now. Integrate AI literacy into schools immediately, even if it's basic stuff. You don't need fancy labs. You can start with free tools, online resources, teachers trained up. The longer Africa waits, the wider that gap gets, and we end up permanently behind. That's not pessimism. It's just the reality of how technology compounds advantages.
Okay, so like what advice can you give like the folks who are like now are about to join unis or colleges and like they are pursuing the older way of just entering with a mindset of just learning. After learning, I get a job and then I get security and type of shit and then I retire.
Yeah, that old path doesn't work anymore, honestly. Here's what I tell them: don't go to university just to get a degree and wait for a job to find you. Use your time there to build skills that matter: code, design, whatever speaks to you. Start projects, build a portfolio, contribute to open source. Network with people doing interesting work. Most importantly, don't wait until you graduate to start earning or building. You can start a side hustle now, freelance, build products while you're studying. Look at what you're doing. Wanjiku Digital, Nectarize, the podcast. You're not waiting for some company to give you permission or a salary. You're creating your own path. That's the mindset young people need. University is a resource, not a prison sentence. Use it strategically, but don't let it be the only thing you're doing.
So like the if you speaking of that, there's a question that I asked before. Like what about like how do a person who's doing a pursuing a career that is non-technical like be able to enter into the AI space?
Right. So someone doing something non-technical, maybe they're in business, communications, design, whatever. How do they pivot into AI? Here's the thing. You don't need to become a coder to work in AI. There are so many angles. If you're in business, you can learn how to use AI tools to build products faster, understand the market, manage projects. If you're in communications or content, you can create AI focused content like you're doing. Help people understand these tools. If you're in design, AI is changing design workflows completely. You can master those new tools. The entry point isn't learn to code from scratch. It's understand your existing skills and figure out how AI changes or amplifies them. Then start experimenting with tools, learning on the job. Most important, show curiosity and actually try things instead of just theorizing about it.
So like speaking of that, how like do like people like who are like from not everybody is able to access these tools. There's some folks who are disadvantaged not to have these tools, and it's not by of their choice, but it's on our design, but it's just circumstances that have disadvantaged them. Like they only have access to mobile phones or internet. How can you advise them?
That's real, yeah. Not everyone has a laptop or stable internet. But here's what's possible with just a phone. You can learn coding through apps. You can use free AI tools like ChatGPT or Claude through a browser on mobile data. You can create content. You can do freelance work on platforms like Fiverr. It's slower and more frustrating than having a laptop, but it's not impossible. The second thing is community. Find people locally who have better access and collaborate. Share resources, learn together, build things as a group. Third, focus on problems you can actually solve with what you have instead of waiting for perfect conditions. And honestly, this is where government and institutions matter again. Subsidizing devices, providing free Wi Fi in schools and libraries, making these tools accessible shouldn't be a luxury. That's infrastructure that needs to happen. But in the meantime, young people can't wait. Work with what you've got.
Okay, that has been helpful. So if like now we are concluding the episode on how the AI AI on Africa and the challenges. So like, what do you think like the reforms you could want the Africa to implement for the Africans, because only Africans can come up with African solutions, because you can't expect someone from the Silicon Valley or California to come and just fix their problems.
Right, so here's what I'd push for across Africa. First, education reform. Make tech and AI literacy core, not optional, from primary through university. Second, infrastructure investment. Broadband everywhere, not just cities, so the digital divide doesn't widen. Third, data sovereignty. Africans owning African data, not letting foreign companies extract it for free. Fourth, funding ecosystems, governments and institutions backing local founders and research instead of always looking outward. Fifth, continental collaboration, countries sharing knowledge and resources instead of competing, building regional hubs of innovation. Sixth, policy that protects workers and communities from AI harms while encouraging innovation, not banning it, but being smart about it. And seventh, shift the mindset. Africa isn't waiting for solutions from elsewhere. We're building for ourselves. That requires belief that we can do this, investment in our own people, and young folks like you showing it's possible. That's the foundation.
Okay, let's now like move aside from the tech stuff, and like the early this week or last week we saw the Artemis mission taking place, where the astronauts are being launched to the moon, like this after around 52 years, or if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, but Africa, we never ever have a country that have ever done that. Like, how's our problem, or what's going on?
Yeah, so NASA just launched that Artemis mission. First crewed moon landing in over 50 years, which is massive. And you're right, Africa's never done that. But here's the thing, space exploration requires resources and infrastructure that, frankly, most African countries are still building up for basic needs like healthcare and education. That doesn't mean we shouldn't aspire to it, but the sequencing matters. That said, Africa's got brilliant space scientists and engineers. Some of them work for international agencies. What we need is investment in STEM education, satellite technology for our own use, weather monitoring, agriculture, communications, and gradually building up capacity. Rwanda's got ambitions. South Africa's got infrastructure. It might not be a moon mission tomorrow, but building that foundation now means future generations could do it. It's about playing the long game strategically.
So speaking of that, like, is Africa not much resourceful than the US? Like, cause like we have almost every other minerals that we are found. Like like Africa like contributes like 70 or 90% of all natural resources that the world uses, except for the part of oil.
Exactly. That's the infuriating bit, innit? Africa has the resources, the minerals, the land, the people. We're literally feeding the world's tech and energy needs with our raw materials, but we're selling them cheap to other countries who refine them, build products, and sell them back to us at massive markups. So, yeah, resource wise, Africa could absolutely fund space programs, advanced tech research, everything. The problem isn't resources, it's how we're extracting and exporting them without building local value chains. If Africa processed its own minerals, built its own tech, kept more of the profit locally, we'd have the capital for ambitious projects like space exploration. That's the real conversation, not we can't afford it, but why are we letting others profit from our wealth while we stay dependent? That's a political and economic choice, not a resource problem.
So, Claudia, we have come to the end of the episode. So, like, what's the one thing like you'll want to leave our listeners with?
Right, so here's the one thing. Don't wait. Don't wait for the perfect conditions, the right government policy, the ideal resources. You've got a brain, curiosity, and access to information. That's enough to start. Learn something, build something, share it. Whether it's code, content, a business idea, whatever. Africa's future in AI and tech isn't going to be handed to us by Silicon Valley or China. It's going to be built by young people like you and your listeners who decide today that we're not staying behind. So start now, stay hungry, and remember, you're not just building for yourself, you're building for the continent. That's the mindset that changes things.
So, thank you for having you on the podcast. So, yeah, we like to see you more often. So, thank you. So, yeah, that was the interview between me and Claude. So, we are talking about what the challenges are there Africa is facing on this story of AI, the advantage that we have, the disadvantages that we have. So yeah, that has been the episode. So see you on the next one.